It is the 25th of November, if you can believe it. Chilly outside up here in Maine. We're looking at 22 degrees. So cover those pumpkins up because it's a Thanksgiving edition of All Things Biosimilar. I'm your host, Andrew Bourgoin, and we are about 24 hours away from taking a few days off. We'll be heading out to Chicago to see family and hope everyone else out there is going to have safe and happy travel for the holidays. On this month's episode, we will be focusing on having a little bit of fun. I've been requested actually to do some winners and losers of 2025. I'm not a big fan of calling people winners or losers other than Yankees and Red Sox when the Red Sox win. So I've come up with a different way to characterize maybe some entities in the biosimilars market that had good years and maybe some that hopefully will have better years next year. So we'll do that. I've also just had a handful of questions around the the draft guidance and some of the announcements coming out of FDA last month, and overall, what are some thoughts that I have on that? I will share that. It might be a little bit different than some of the narratives out there, but we'll do those two topics, and maybe I'll ramble on about a few other things. But first, let's jump in. Here's the characterization I'm going to use, right? Winners and losers. I'm not a big fan again. I think that's a little harsh. Aaron Judge is a loser. That's fine. But here in the spirit of Thanksgiving week, what I'm going to say is who gets stuffing, which is my favorite dish. I'm not sure about you. Maybe stuffing's not for you. If so, go ahead, pass it over. And just to be clear, I'm more of a traditional box stuffing guy. My wife, Amy, makes a fantastic, a little bit more elevated stuffing, if you will. But give me that stovetop. I'm sorry. I grew up on that, and that's just tastes like home. So, who gets stuffing and who gets peas? Nothing against peas, but when you look at that beautiful Thanksgiving plate palette, I'm mixing peas in with something else just to take care of them. Who gets stuffing and who gets peas? We're gonna do this across a few different categories here. I've got other, which we'll save for the end. I've got manufacturers, I've got products, and I've got markets. So let's go ahead and start with products. It will be no surprise to folks who have engaged with all things biosimilar over the course of the year which product, which biosimilar is going to get the stuffing for 2025. That is Pavblu. Pavblu really might get $500 million worth of stuffing in 2025, and we think that this is a launch unlike any other in the biosimilar space. There's a lot of great lessons, in our opinion, to be learned from this. Most importantly, get your cross-functional team embedded in your portfolio selection analysis process, specifically legal and development, as early as possible. But stuffing goes to Pavblu. We're gonna keep the meal here in retina for peas, and unfortunately, ranibizumab's getting all the peas. And I'm not going to call specifically Cimerli or BioViz or Xbrain's product here, Leukoviz, that got another CRL, but I think it's just a hard year for ranibizumab. This might be the end of the line for that molecule now that there's going to be so many available aflibercept products. So peas go to ranibizumab, and we're going to move on from products here to manufacturers. Now, I'm not going to single out a specific manufacturer here. There's kind of a theme for who gets the stuffing and who gets the peas. Stuffing is actually going to go to Chinese developing and manufacturing companies. Big year for Biothera and Henlius. A lot of approvals, some launches as well. I think when we look across the time of biosimilar development and manufacturing. We've seen the rise of some South Korean companies. We've seen some European companies over the years. We've seen companies that already had their own established biomanufacturing just plug in biosimilars into their process. But now that some very strong candidates from China are coming to market. Most notably, I think the cherry on top is this Perjeta approval. Really, this is a good year, and they're getting the stuffing. No questions asked. On the flip side of that, we're going to pass the peas. Shout out Maceo Parker to some of the European manufacturers. Unfortunately, challenging year for some of them. I highlighted the challenge for Alvatech with this latest CRL. A tough year for Formicon without getting those similarly royalties, and Xbrain as well. I guess it could be positive that they sold off Cimzia and their development team in Scandinavia, but also they received their CRL for their ranibizumab product. So just we're hoping a better year for next year when it comes to some of the manufacturing and development work for the European company. So stuffing, enjoy it for the Chinese development and manufacturers of biosimilars, and off we go to the next category, markets. This was kind of a tough one because I didn't cook a lot of peas, or maybe enough. But let's start with the stuffing. Look, some of you know I'm such a homer for this biosimilar space. I love it so much. I talk about it. My 6-year-old daughter talks about it because she's just osmosis of understanding it because I talk to her about it so much. Oh, you'd like to join Thanksgiving at our family so you don't need the tryptophan and you could fall asleep just by listening to me talk over this? Yeah, sure. Join us. Welcome. Sounds like a real blast. So the stuffing here is grounded in the fact that I think it's fantastic that Sandoz invested in Tysabri biosimilar netalizumab. From what I understand, it was not an easy go for various reasons. And I think that's reflected in the fact that they're the only one that seemingly will have a product competing in the U.S. market. But boy, that's a whole patient set that now will have access to another version of the product, and I think that's a big part of what this is all about is obviously access and increasing the number of options available to patients, to prescribers, and to others. So I'm going to pass the stuffing here to Tyruko. Better congratulations to that team, and certainly a big deal to have a biosimilar now available for support the treatment of MS. All right, the peas. Look, I'm not sure still what to make of the denosumab market. We're looking at potentially 11 to 12 launches in the next between June 1st or May 31st for Sandoz's products, and maybe end of next year. That's a lot of peas to hand out, but that market, I still am scratching my head. I think a lot of companies are. So that's where I'm shipping the peas to the denosumab biosimilar market. We'll see how everything shakes out there. I think it's not the fact that it's a highly competitive space. It's more so the fact that so many companies entered it. I think it's one of those products, back to kind of portfolio selection. It was a product that sat in a time period where there weren't a lot of other products sitting, and trying to make sure that there was a consistent cadence of launches and development, etc. Potentially also some synergies in the development. Oh, it's one molecule and we get 2 products out of it. This is a no-brainer. However, I would be curious to have anonymous conversations with teams that are now sitting with Prolia and Xgeva biosimilars that are going to launch sometime in 2026, if they wouldn't instead like to have a fifth to market bevacizumab or Avastin product, or a fourth to market rituximab, or a sixth to market Herceptin, right? Just be curious if 10th or 11th or even 8th to market denosumab is a preferred asset to have over maybe being a late to market entrant of some of these other markets out there. So anyway, hope you're hungry, denosumab market, because you're getting a bunch of peas. Okay, finally, other. Well, this is a fun one, right? Other, that can be about anything. And this isn't lazy. This is purposeful, that I'm giving stuffing and peas to the same entity. So I hope you're hungry, private labels. You get the stuffing, because I don't know if I had a week go by this year during my first year here with Bourgoin Insights Group and all things biosimilar, where it didn't come up, private label. And I'm not specifically talking about Cordavis or Qualant or Nuvela. It's just a term that everyone seemed to have a question about, position on, an opinion certainly about. And so I think that deserves some stuffing. It was a big year for private label. I think a lot of new private labels emerged. I think there are still more to come. I think a lot of companies had a business question around, well, why don't we have this? How do we do this? Can you have this ready for me by end of year? We need to stand something up. And so just a big year. But again, hope you're hungry, private labels, because you'll also have some peas. And why is this? Well, excuse me, I don't think we should be forgetting about the J&J Samsung case that happened earlier this year. My take here is that the role of private labels now kind of has kind of an eyebrow raised as to how they will play because of that case. Let's recall that I think coming out of it, there's a lot of questions around, well, if companies go through a settlement process, will they be able to work with a private label? What is that going to look like? I would think that they still can, but there'll just be a bit more, maybe a definition around what that relationship looks like, when that relationship can happen. And so with that, some peas comes your way, because probably this world of everyone's going to do it, it's going to be amazing, we need to have a private label strategy. I think it's going to be a little bit more constrained or focused, what that can look like, how it can happen moving forward. So yeah, peas and stuffing. There we go. Maybe we'll change that in years to come, but for now, that's what we're serving up. All right, second topic. The quote unquote groundbreaking changes in FDA regulations for biosimilars. I'm not going to give peas or stuffing anymore. You can probably hear in the slight tone of my voice that I have not been wowed by this as much as other people in the market, but I've got a lot of questions about why that is, and I've addressed that in some of the reports over the past month. What I want to talk about is a question I've received, which is basically, look, is this going to result in increased competition for biosimilars? That should be the only question, right? And because a lot of assumptions are made now that and connections are being made for this IQVIA paper. There's a biosimilar void, and now that we've reduced or removed these requirements, floodgates are open. And so I think the most important question is that true? Will there be an increase And to what degree of an increase will there be in the number of products that will be targeted now for biosimilar competition, and also the number of companies that will do that? This is how we think about it. The first kind of question is, what is the impact of the draft guidance, and then what is the degree of which that impact will have on companies currently competing in this space and companies that may have ambition to compete in this space? So what is the impact? Just trying to be simple here. There's time and money. Okay, time perspective, potentially without having to participate in phase 3 study, you're able to apply earlier, right? Send in your application, enter the patent dance, potentially move through some sort of legal situation, and ultimately get a settlement and or some sort of freedom to operate decision that you can come to market. That's the time element of it, is that all of those things could potentially happen sooner if you decide to maintain a development start date that is the same that we've been seeing thus far in the market. Now, that might not be the case. Companies might just develop later and not really see the need to apply earlier. But we'll talk about that in a second. The other one, investment. These studies are not cheap. There will certainly be downstream impacts for these investment decisions, which we're going to come back to in a little bit. But there will still be clinical work that needs to be done, and that clinical work will still be expensive. Just reference product, number of patients required to show statistical significance. I mean, it's clinical has not gone to zero, right? But it has gone down dramatically. So the question becomes, the degree of that impact. Is it, number one, so low now that companies see a increase in the overall value of that asset over time because some of the upfront costs, some of the large upfront costs have been reduced? That should be the case, just math and how NPV analysis works. If you remove some of the near-term costs, that's a good thing for an investment. The other part of this, though, is in thinking about incremental cost versus the totality of an upfront cost. And this is where kind of the two different company types and the degree of which this decision matters to them plays a role here. And so time and money, the companies with biosimilars versus companies without biosimilars, and with and without biosimilars, broadly, it's like with or without. Do you have biomanufacturing capabilities? Do you have existing commercial teams that are marketing and selling these products? Let's start with the companies without. Biosimilars have been, likely will continue to be, an ambitious place to grow if you're a pharma company. This has been a growth opportunity for a lot of the major generic companies, and certainly an opportunistic investment for companies that already have biomanufacturing capabilities, be it brand or major generic biosimilar companies. Will companies without those capabilities, right? Without biomanufacturing capabilities, without existing capability in the U.S. to commercialize these products, does this decision, from a cost basis, influence them to continue to go after biosimilars, or to potentially allocate more investment dollars to biosimilars? We aren't sure. We actually believe that's not the case. We don't think that this decision all of a sudden is going to make biosimilars a more attractive investment. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, a lot of biosimilar companies in their Q3 earnings have brought this up. It's important. Upfront cost to develop, if you don't have manufacturing already in place, is still significantly high, right? Sandoz leadership calls biosimilars an expensive hobby. I think that's funny. And so will the reduction of this still, is it enough? Is taking away of phase 3 clinical costs going to all of a sudden open the floodgates to more biosimilar competitors? I don't think it actually will. It might, maybe one, two here or there, but not all of a sudden say we're all in, right? This is the certainty is now clear, costs are competitive. No, that's not what we believe. And there's the second reason to that is when it comes to investment, you always challenge one against alternatives. And we think that for companies that have been seeing kind of biosimilars as an ambition to get into them, maybe it's just a natural growth progression for that company to go from generic to specialty generics to ADCs, biosimilars, et cetera, et cetera. We actually think that ADCs, GLP-1s, these potentially might become more attractive to them. Biosimilars have not been a market that really, I think, has invoked a lot of confidence, and is certainly not a market grounded in certainty. And those are things that investors really like, confidence and certainty. So has this, from a financial position, from an investment perspective, do we think that this is going to result in more companies getting into this space? If it does, it will not be kind of a significant number of players. The timing element, will that tip the scales for companies to get into this space? We actually think this one's a little bit more interesting because standing something up and catching up could be interesting for some companies that from a time perspective are like, look, we're 4.5, 5 years behind. Are you 2 years behind now? And is 2 years something that is worth trying for maybe a couple products that are become complementary to some other products in your portfolio or future portfolio? That's interesting. And then obviously the reduced financial does play a little bit more of a role. So again, we would net all this out for companies that don't currently compete in this space. We don't see it bringing more to the table, really. And if they do, just a few. So now let's talk about companies with biosimilars and whether or not we believe this decision is going to increase their, let's say, their number of targets for portfolio selection. We'll go back again to the biosimilars void, one of the most talked about white papers in the biosimilars industry since the 2013 Andrew Bourgoin authored white paper from Thomson Reuters. No big deal. I think I was the only person. Oh, my mother read that too. God love her. The void, everyone's just talking about it. And good thing too, because it's important to identify the fact that there are a lot of products out there that are not necessarily going to have competition. Okay, so will companies with biosimilars now start targeting those products? Let's talk about why potentially they didn't target those products to begin with. The assumption here is that the number one attribute of the products is the assumption of gross sales or net sale revenue of a product, LOE minus one, before biosimilars entry, right? What's the top of the funnel number that's going in before we divide it by X, take a percentage off for gross to net, put a risk, if you're smart, a large risk number against that. The higher the numerator, the better. And now the question is, well, what about some of these other ones lower on the list that aren't driving $500 million to $1 billion? Are some of those now put in the mix for portfolio selection? And will biosimilar companies start to go after those? Well, our answer there is, again, the same as the other. We think yes. However, we don't think it's going to be a ton of companies that do that. We think, and it's helpful now that it doesn't cost as much for sure. But all of those companies with biosimilars, there are a handful that will stay in this game for a long time. This is part of the DNA of their company. This is the platform by which they've built a business. They're still going to have the same investment questions, either internally, they have different business units, they have a manufacturing facility that they could be a bit more profitable if they were filling their tanks with product X that they're going to contract manufacturer for a company versus versus an in-house product that maybe is complex and challenging. We believe we will see some of the major players start targeting some of the products that are, let's say, the non-obvious ones. What will be important for that decision are the outcomes of Tyruko, Episcly, the Xolair biosimilars. How well does Omniclo do, being one of few competing in a market? Because the math around one of two, one of three versus one of eight versus one of 10, that's an important part as to why you would go after some of the why in your portfolio selection process, you would assume fewer competitors. So ultimately, back to the key business question here, will this decision result in a massive change in the number of biosimilars with competition moving forward? We don't think it's massive. We think it will just become opportunistic for some companies to add maybe one or two that before maybe they didn't. We hope we're wrong. We hope that instead this decision is going to lead to companies announcing that they're going to go after 10 products in the quote unquote void, that before that wasn't the case. That would be amazing. We're not feeling super confident that that's going to be the case, unfortunately. We think there's just too many other points of uncertainty that exist in bringing a biosimilar to market. We actually don't want to discount the potential for the time. Companies potentially could start working on Skyrizi. Obviously, we know some are already, and filing and entering the patent dance much sooner than we saw for some of the other products. Again, relative to loss of regulatory exclusivity. So we shall see. We shall see. But overall, excited, and certainly well done to all the teams that worked hard to get this regulatory outcome. How it will materialize in the market, we hope we're wrong, but we don't see it being as significant in increasing the number of new entrants in the market looking to compete for biosimilars, and then certainly the new targets for portfolio selection. We're really not sure if this is going to change that number significantly. Again, we hope we're wrong. All right, so final words here from me are words of gratitude. I personally have had a year that I will look back on and have a smile on my face, because I got to do a lot of things that I absolutely love professionally. I got to work with people who care about this market. I got to develop some material content solutions in support of informing people who work in this market, and I got to have a lot of creativity in doing that, which is important to me, and I want to share gratitude for that. I know that the caliber of information services teams are elite out there. I also know that there are not too many people who spend as much time thinking, analyzing, monitoring, trying to understand the biosimilars market as much as I do, and I'm filled with appreciation and gratitude for my customers, subscribers, and folks that were inquisitive over the course of the year to learn more and seek to understand what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and if they could participate. I'm grateful for you all. Thank you for enabling me a year that is unlike any other until, of course, next year. And the next episode in December will be doing just that, looking at next year. We will be talking about what we think some of the biggest questions to be answered in 2026 will be, some of the important launches, and also just some of the things that we're most interested in seeing unfold in 2026. So thank you all for listening today. Thank you all for subscribing, sharing, all of those social media things. And beyond that, if you're listening to this podcast and we are not related, it's because you are doing some sort of work in biosimilars. And I just want to thank you for continuing to work in a space that is not easy, is constantly challenging, but really does matter to patients. I know many of them, perhaps you do too, or are one. And so keep the fight going and have a happy, wonderful Thanksgiving, hopefully with more stuffing than peas. Thanks so much. Take care.